Welcome to our live program. As a reminder, the information provided during this event is for informational purposes only. Any opinions expressed during this live event are solely that of the individual and do not reflect the views or opinions of Providence's family of organizations.
Well, hello and welcome to our broadcast and podcast today. I'm so excited to be with you, and I'm Martin Schreiber with the Mission Leadership Institute at Providence. Today, we're talking about mission-centered leadership and why it is important right now. I'm so excited as well to introduce our host, Nancy Jordan, who is the Associate Vice President for the Mission Leadership Institute. Nancy, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Martin. Welcome, everyone. We're so pleased that you've joined us today. And just as a invitation, if you find that you have questions along the way, please feel free to submit those, and we'll hopefully get to them during our very busy conversation today. We are very pleased to be joined by best-selling author Chris Lowney, also co-chair of Common Spirit Health System, and just a real sort of luminary in mission-centered leadership. Chris, welcome to you. And we had the gift of enjoying your presence and your wisdom during a recent session of the Providence Mission Leadership Institute, which is an innovative new program from the Providence Health System, really aimed towards emerging leaders, mission-centered leaders, and emerging mission integration leaders. That's a mouthful. For those who may not know you as well, would you tell us just a little bit about who you are and what can you tell us as an introduction to your interest in whole person or mission-centered leadership?
Thanks, Nancy. I'll answer your question directly, but before I do that, I'll just say a couple of things. One, so this is the first, you called me a luminary in your introduction. This is the first time I've ever been called a luminary in anything. And the second thing I guess I would like to know is that little disclaimer thing that says, the opinions just reflect what this guy thinks and have nothing to do with us. Is that only for me that you have that disclaimer? Or?
I think it's an equal opportunity
Okay,
effort.
thank you. I appreciate that. So now to answer the question you actually asked in terms of background, so I'll give like the thumbnail version, and if in the course of later discussion you want to come back to it, please do. So I'm a New York City kid, grew up in Queens near the old Shea Stadium, if anybody knows that. And I went to a high school of the Jesuits, and right after high school I joined the Jesuits. And I stayed there for about half a dozen years, happy, but eventually understood that this is really not my path in life, to be a priest, to be a Jesuit. And I did the next most logical thing when you leave seminary, which is go into investment banking. And I worked at JP Morgan for nearly a couple of decades, and not only in the US, but was also in Asia, Europe, and then I left Morgan, in part, we could maybe chat more about that, in part to do maybe more philanthropically active work. It might be one way of putting it, more meaningful work. Not that that work is meaningless, but more meaningful work, and also in part to do some writing about leadership, and heroic leadership is one of the things that indirectly has brought me to this discussion and to you folks.
Thanks, Chris. Leading right into the title of your best-selling book, Heroic Leadership, one of the many concepts that you share with us, the growing leader, is the concept of self-awareness. And you actually say that the concept of self-awareness is maybe even more important than technical skills, and that you're never finished with that self-awareness. Can you tell us a little bit about why self-awareness is important to the mission-centered leader?
Yes. So I make a couple of comments about that, and maybe even offer a very simplistic way that people might work on their self-awareness, if that's okay. So, to play off your question, Nancy, so one, potentially even more important sometimes than technical skills. And I guess what I mean when I say something like that is, it's great to have a hammer, a screwdriver, let's call those your technical skills of your profession. But kind of if you don't know what's going on inside yourself, what's going on inside other people, you're just not going to use those tools properly or well, you know. I sometimes use the example of coming from a wonderful writer and physician, Jerome Groopman, who talked about his early time as a doctor and having the experience of once making a terrible misdiagnosis in a patient, not because he didn't have lab reports and so on, but because he was not in the proper frame of mind to listen to that patient properly. So that would be kind of an example of, if I don't know what's going on in me, I might not use my technical skills perfectly well. So that's one sort of thing. Second, keying off your question, a never-ending work. Yeah, you know, I think that those of us who hopefully are growing in our professions, you know, we're constantly finding ourselves in new situations, new kinds of people interactions. Each human being is different, and therefore the ways we interact with one team might not work with the next team. We get promoted perhaps into roles that have different authority and responsibility, and those call on us to maybe emphasize different ways of how we interact with people and so on. And to me, this is a self-awareness job. And so that's what I say, that you know, that work of becoming more self-aware is not like a plateau or something that gets finished. And if I may, Nancy, just to go on for another few seconds, you know, I often talk about a very simple tool for self-awareness updating that anybody could implement, you know, starting tomorrow. Find some moment in your day, like after lunch, on the at the end of the workday, commuting, if you're commuting, where you could carve out 2 minutes, even no telephone, no social media, no music, just you. And, you know, remind yourself why you're grateful as a person, one important step. And maybe just go back through the last few hours and relive the situations you were in, the people you were with, and maybe take away some lesson that would help in the next few hours. You know, if you were distracted, what was going on there? Or if part of my job this year for myself has been to be more assertive, how did I perform in these meetings and so on? So yes, self-awareness, to me, absolutely crucial platform to lead well in any industry, any environment.
Thank you, Chris. You are speaking of something that's a little bit different than what we're sort of used to. When we say, you know, I'm going to become a leader, sometimes we look to checklists. Okay, I've got to learn how to write performance evaluations, or I've got to read this book on how to lead a staff meeting. I've got to. So those things are, yes, important. We need those tools. But what you're speaking of really speaks to that idea of the whole person, really sort of taking an authentic look, taking that 2 minutes out to reflect and just sort of do a reset on who we are, what we're doing, and what we're trying to do. And Martin, your work with the Mission Leadership Institute really speaks to this. And I wonder if you could share just a bit about what you've observed with this idea of self-awareness and this, again, look at the whole person as the developing leader.
I appreciate Chris so much in helping us to think about what grows. And all along, he has been our kind of guide around what you feed grows. And can I stop periodically to know what it is that I'm feeding in my soul, in the team that I'm surrounding? What kind of emotions are coming up? It seems that we're learning, like so many aspects of the COVID world, that there are big emotions. And we might be reflective of what is it that I'm bringing into a room, and where is it that I'm taking people? Do I take them to the corner and gossip? I take them to the bottom of the mountain and we're going to climb it together? And those aspects, and Chris would say this in the book too, there are pit stops for me to pause and say, what is happening in my day? And to be very reflective of that, I think, is something we're learning that is helping people to survive in this COVID world. That sense of what I feed grows from some of the great writers is really transparent to us as authentic leaders and mission-centered leaders.
Thank you, Martin. You know, It dawned on me that heroic leadership was written before, of course, COVID. But so many of the lessons that we can take away, Chris, are so critical to those points that Martin just made, and to what we're discovering as we're working with and helping to form these future leaders, and present leaders. One of those key points. I found in chapter 2. Now I'm very familiar with the book. It was a key a key textbook, if you will, for one of my graduate courses. So
Sorry about
I
that.
it's a real shout out to you. One of the concepts that you describe in chapter 2 are characteristics that challenge the command and control approach to leadership, and you've sort of really described the alternatives. And I wonder if you could just dig a little deeper into that. It's sort of for me the difference between the carrot and the stick as a leader. And by talking about whole person and talking about the self awareness, we really sort of enter into a challenge to that hierarchical leadership, that command and control. I'm the boss. I know everything, and we know that that may not be the best approach as a leader. So, what might you say about that?
Yeah. Yeah, Nancy. So maybe I could make a comment on that, a couple of comments, a top down comment and a bottom up comment, if I could.
Please.
So a top down comment, you mentioned COVID. To me, more broadly, we're just living through an era. I mean, it's total chaos. Whatever the heck industry you're in, whatever you're managing, uh, things are changing too quickly. There's way too much information flowing past you. You have to make decisions in time frames that are very unreasonable. You make a decision, and then the circumstances on which you base the decision all change in a month. So this is the environment in which we all have to live. And so my top-down comment would be this kind of old stereotype that one hierarchical leader could somehow be in a position to field all of these all of these complex, ever-changing dilemmas, opportunities, decisions that come up in an organization. It's total craziness. We all know it is. So the first way I think of the first way in which I would make this case of we need to think about leadership in a different way than the old stereotype is simply that the pace of change, complexity, everything else has kind of disqualified this old notion that one hierarchical great leader can somehow be the one who's pulling all the levers and making all the decisions. It just doesn't work. And let me make the bottom up case, which of course is the flip side of what I just said. The bottom up case, I would say this, that we all tend to walk around, like when I always begin sessions asking people to think of the names of leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And invariably, we all think stereotypically. Somebody will think of Pope Francis or Barack Obama, whatever the heck they think about. Of course, they'll never think of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the dictionary definitions of leadership is to point out a way, direction, or goal, and to influence others toward it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we're all doing that all the time. Whether I manage 1,000 people or just manage myself, by how hard I work, my integrity, how I treat colleagues, I'm sort of implicitly pointing out a way, and I'm having some influence, large or small. So I guess the point I'm making, Nancy, is I feel like there are two companion ideas that marry together very well. In other words, the top-downish idea of in a fast-changing, complex world, there's no way the old model of one great leader will work anymore. And the bottom-up idea of, therefore, we need each person to step up and seize the leadership opportunity and responsibility that is theirs by definition, no matter what their role or how many people they manage.
When we think about the sort of the Jesuit inspiration of we're leaders sort of all the time, we're all leaders, that really speaks to what you've just described. And I'm thinking, and I'm curious about Martin's thoughts on this. there's research coming out about this next generation who's in the workforce. And we are learning that meaning is very, very important. That the work that I do, if I'm going to commit my time to your organization, then the work needs to be meaningful. I have to find value in it. And there has to be a values alignment. So I look to Martin. I mean, what do you think about that in terms of this idea that, we can really empower our employees, our caregivers, to feel that they can embrace their inner leadership, because they do. They lead in their families. They lead in their friend circles, and so on. So I wonder how we can carry that over. And Martin, what do you think about that? Our ability to do that.
Well, I think Chris brings up a great point in that there is a challenge in this pandemic to command control. And is it being represented in that challenge in a new way, that voices from the periphery or the margins are feeling that they're now heard? And that's meaningful, because now I can trust my organization. I can trust my manager. I can trust the people who are sitting outside my office, which I'm feeling right now, because all of a sudden our dialogue becomes one of equality. And I think this movement around diversity and equality is really central to how we've challenged command control. It's a beautiful world that we're building because of that. And maybe it's about us taking important steps to make people feel that they are no longer invisible. And if that's what is the aspect of mission-centered leadership, it makes sense to me. It makes sense to how Chris is speaking to us today, that no one is made to feel invisible anymore. And I just appreciate that could be what is being represented in the pandemic in a very different way in terms of leadership that might not have been before. And I think Chris might give some comments to that as well.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the one thing I would mention, going back, Nancy, to the way you framed it for us, it would be, another part of the you talk about a generational difference in how people are thinking about their life and work and leadership and so on. And we're living through the so-called Great Resignation, which is by no means exclusively a generational issue, but there is something going on. And I guess I feel that, at least in part of what's going on goes a bit to your question, Nancy, namely that people are saying, something, my life is not worth wasting it on something that's not meaningful, and it gets to this issue of so-called whole person leadership, and when I say that, what goes through my mind, people would have different ways of thinking about it. What goes through my mind is that, sometimes people feel like, let's say I'm a spiritual believer, maybe even a religious believer. I go to mosque on Friday or temple on Saturday, church on Sunday, whatever my tradition happens to be. And there are things that are really important to me. And then I feel like I go to work, and in order to strive and get ahead and succeed, I have to be a different person and kind of throw some of those values that are really important to me personally out the window. And that's a really soul deadening. Well, I mean, that works well in the short term in terms of getting ahead. In the old days, it used to. But I think ultimately it's a very soul deadening way to live. And I think a lot of folks are voting with their feet and saying, I'm not going to live that way anymore. And I think that, in a way, people don't have to live that way. They're going to be better. They're going to do a better job, whether it's a Providence, Common Spirit, whatever, when they bring to work those inspirations, those pieces of themselves that really drive them to their core, that this is really worth sacrificing for, this is worth doing excellently, this is really what I care about. And to me, that's like whole person, in other words, where I can marry who I want to be at my best to this role that I'm getting to play in this organization. And organizations that can accommodate that are really going to thrive. And organizations that force people into living split lives, those are going to be the ones that, live with the Great Resignation forever and get compliance, but not really inspired performance.
This idea, Chris, and Martin, you've identified it so beautifully, that we're not compartmentalized versions of ourselves when we show up at work each day. So the idea that we can and really need to recognize that we're complex human beings that are made of mind, body, spirit. And so I think we're really getting at some real key issues that are important for the mission centered leader. We do have a couple of questions that have come in, and two of them
Uh-oh.
are sort of related. I think you'll be able to answer them. Two of them, I have confidence. Two of them are somewhat related. So from Sandy, we hear, when is self-awareness a way to deflect further exploration of an issue? And then I'm just going to also add John's question because I think they're somewhat related. Do you think that there can be healthy and or unhealthy self-awareness practices or routines? What I'm hearing in those questions is, can reflection be a way to sort of avoid and maybe even justify some of my behaviors if I'm not being very mission centered as a leader, or can it be a way? Can I engage in practices that maybe aren't as productive or at worst unhealthy, as a way to, when I'm stepped aside from my day job and I'm really ought to be using time to sort of be engaging in authentic reflection, could I be using that time in other ways?
Yeah. So first, let me say in general, I mean, it's great that people join the conversation, and um, that people have questions is wonderful, but if people want to also share reactions or thoughts, that's great too. And to Sandy's question I found intriguing, and if Sandy wants to amplify that a little bit, what that might
Yes.
look like, I think that would be great if Sandy wants to comment further. But now let me answer the questions as I would perceive them. And I guess I would say, you know, a self-awareness kind of practiced well, I don't see how it ever gets us into trouble, Now, can we, um, are there, inappropriate ways of understanding what it means to be a self-aware leader worker? Absolutely, and so let me give one kind of stereotype. I talk a lot to groups about decision making and the difficulty of decision making in today's environments. And one of the things I talk about is that sometimes people are preternaturally conditioned just to make decisions on the available evidence. And so I sometimes encourage people to kind of make sure they have in their decision process moments of stepping back and reflecting on what's going on inside me. Do I have all the information I need? What is the broader sense of mission or purpose that this fits into? To kind of take stock of those kinds of things. There are people, that many of us don't like to make decisions, or we don't like to make decisions unless we're sure we're right. And the reality of the modern world is you never know that you're right, almost never, unless there's like one choice left. I'm talking about
Hmm.
strategic things, not
Right.
medical best practice. There may be right things. So in that context, I could see how a so-called reflective or self-aware practice might be somebody's excuse to not make a decision,
Mhm.
simply because they're afraid of taking risks, making a mistake, getting it wrong, blowback from other people if it could be an unpopular decision. So yeah, I mean that's how I would riff off of the questions that
Mhm.
these folks put.
Very helpful. Very helpful. Great points, and it also makes me think. Perhaps I'm a little too biased. Perhaps I'm not going to thoroughly look at during self-aware, reflection. I'm not really going to look at what my stuff is. Maybe I'm not the best judge, but maybe this is not about judgment.
Hmm.
We do have a couple more questions, but Martin, I want to give you a chance to weigh in on that as well.
I just think it's really important that if self-awareness means I'm off in the cave or I'm just on the cushion and I'm not living in the present moment, then I think that we lose something that's beautiful in front of us. And maybe that's part of this idea of how self-awareness is constantly in front of us and who is in front of us. And that love, I know Chris has spoken so much about that there would be some love component to my interactions that wouldn't remove me, but would keep me in check with what's happening in front of me. And that's a very hard thing to do. I have not figured that out by any stretch of the imagination. But it would seem that self-awareness could maybe draw me back to this moment, to this presence, to this human being in front of me, of how I might love them more.
Martin, I think you just exactly answered Saeed's question he asks, do you believe that investing in raising self-awareness is also honoring and getting to understand the beauty of us as human beings? And I think you've just answered that. Joseph asks, how can we best support others as they pursue self-awareness? What can we do? What can we do as leaders? What can we do as teachers, as farmers, as
Yeah.
colleagues?
Is that Joe, did you say? It's coming
Joseph,
from?
yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
Joseph. Yeah, so it's a great question. I think I might broaden, I'll broaden the question first. That I think the first thing is, if you manage folks or lead folks, what's your fundamental point of view about what does it mean to lead or manage, And so the old stereotype was, I have goals that I have to achieve this year, and therefore I need people to do X, Y, and Z so I could deliver these goals. And if it could, in some people, lapse into a very instrumental, using people as tools really just to get a result. And so what I would invite folks who manage or lead to think is, what is implicitly the way how you think it mean, what does it mean to manage folks? And I sometimes say that I feel like it's a sacred trust, really. You're, for a time, being entrusted with the lives and careers of individuals, and I would say part of your accountability is to help those people to flourish in the sense of to become the best possible versions of themselves, which means things like that somebody grows their skills, somebody's challenged to grow, maybe I stretch people, I give them new job opportunities, and so on. And the point that Joseph put on the table, I'm helping them to become self-aware so that they can keep on improving. I'm helping them to become self-aware, not just, you made a mistake on this thing and I need you to do it better so I could get this job done. That's important. That's important. But also, I want to help you to become more self-aware so that you raise your game for your own sake, and that happens all kinds of ways. So one answer to Joseph's question is to give honest feedback, which nobody likes to do. Everything is like these, let me check the boxes and kind of have a nice conversation, not upset somebody. And okay, that feels nice maybe if you're a manager, but this conflict avoidance crap really doesn't help anybody to improve their games. So one ingredient of self-awareness, coming from Joseph's question, is, am I giving the kind of feedback that's helped people to understand themselves and grow? Another thing would be, am I actually giving people I just recommended we all should take a little pit stop every day for a couple of minutes to assess ourselves. If I'm managing people, am I affording them that opportunity? Am I even encouraging them to do that? Or am I the kind of micromanager who is so controlling of people's time and tasks and efforts that it kind of gives them no opportunity to step back and understand their own strengths and weaknesses and what's going on inside them and so on.
Thank you so much, Chris. Martin, Chris and Martin, as we're closing out here at our time, it was too fast. I think we had so many questions we could have continued on with. Martin, do you have any closing comments?
I just want to thank those who operated into this dialogue from a distance, and that the voices of Joseph and of John and of Sandy and Saeed, that they informed who we are. And that might be a continued practice for all of us, of just how do all of these voices give us a greater sense of who we are as a whole person? And I'm very grateful today for both Nancy and Chris to be with you. So thank you.
And for me, thanks for the opportunity, Nancy and Martin. I'm very happy to do it. I think what you guys have taken on here is really exciting and interesting. I mean, I think big organizations, especially in healthcare, need to do this kind of thing so we could raise everyone's game. If we don't do that, we're not going to rise to the many challenges we have. So I'm a fan of what you folks are doing. And let me just say, I'm very easy to find online, whether on LinkedIn or Facebook or through a website. And I'm very happy to continue the conversation with anybody who wants to try to be in touch, ask a question, make a comment. I'm very happy to have that continued dialogue.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that opportunity. And I know you may not want to be referred to as a luminary, but you are certainly a partner in this journey that we're on towards mission-centered leadership. And I want to thank you again, and thank you to Martin, and thank you to our system for providing this opportunity. To all who may still have questions, we're going to continue to follow up with questions. So if we couldn't get to you today during this time, stay posted. We will get to you. And thank you for joining us. And we look forward to more conversations.